Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is fun.
So what were you thinking about your very first stand-up routine back in the day? What aspects of your identity gave you the best material?
Well, when I started out as a comic, I was just like an Eddie Murphy, Andrew Dice Clay wannabe. And basically, I used every slur in the book and told tampon jokes. So I wasn't thinking much except like, how can I make them laugh and how can I be the most offensive human being on earth? Because those were my role models and that's who I followed in the footsteps of. And it wasn't until much later in my career that it evolved into something where I was like, oh, I actually have a platform. And
That's a trajectory of most artists, right? You start emulating your idols, and then you find your own voice.
yeah.
What was that process like for you, finding your voice in comedy?
I found my voice in comedy, sadly, after 9/11. I'm born and raised in the great state of New Jersey. I'm one of the very few people who call it great, but I'm telling you it is. And so I experienced 9/11 firsthand as a Jersey girl. And then suddenly, about 6 months after that, I became the target of so much hate in the United States. Islam was vilified, which to this day it is obscenely vilified, and being Arab became something that wasn't desired. And so that's when I went back on stage 10 days after 9/11, and one of the club owners was like, please don't sit and tell the Palestine jokes. Like, this is going to be dangerous. And I was like, I always talk about Palestine, Palestinian. That's what I do. And that's when I realized that I had choices to make. I could either talk about stuff that people didn't want to hear about, but that mattered to me, that were funny to me, or I could be scared. And I think that's what created the space that I now perform in.
I told you I spoke with Dean Obadallah, who's a partner of yours, another Muslim American comic. I spoke with Amir Rahman, a Muslim comic from Australia. Both of them said 9/11 was a pivotal point for them in their comedy as well.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting.
And
Now,
it was a different pivot for me because I'm a woman. So I experienced a completely different kind of rage than the men did.
how different?
Women are always targeted differently than men. So producers left me out of things that the male comics did because they didn't think I fit the stereotype of scary Muslim, the people we fear. And then people targeted me with different types of threats than the guys get. You know, guys are told that they're jerks, girls are told they're going to be attacked.
In your comedy, nothing seems to be off limits. You've gone into your sexual history or lack of it back then. Is there anything that's off limits for you as far as being personally revealing?
Absolutely nothing is off limits for me. And it's been a really interesting journey because, as I said, like in the 90s, we used slurs and we didn't think about it twice. That's something I would never do now, not because I'm being censored, but because I understand that I'm alienating a part of the audience that I actually want to have on my team. But I won't censor any issues because I perform in third world countries. I perform in places where if I say something wrong, I could actually get jailed. And I'm not going to give up my right to say something wrong in America out of fear because I think there is a real fear that saying one wrong thing loses you your career these days. And so I'm adamant about the fact that absolutely nothing is off limits. Dead babies can be funny.
They can.
Oh, hell yeah.
Does your set change when you go to the Middle East?
My set changes wherever I go. So my set changes if I'm in New York or if I'm in Calgary or if I'm in Toronto or if I'm in Dubai or, Jerusalem. Wherever I go, I try to like do something that makes the locals feel like I care, even though I don't.
So you tweak little things.
Yeah. But also when I do comedy in the Middle East, I do it in Arabic. And I don't just directly translate jokes. That doesn't work. So I write an entire new routine when I'm there in Arabic.
Okay.
So that it goes over.
Okay.
Arabic's a fun language for comedy, by the way.
Why is that?
Because it sounds like such an angry language. So when you're doing it and people are laughing, it's surreal. It's great.
You talked about finding your voice not just as a Muslim American comic, but female Muslim American comic. How do you find your material differences, your rage, as you put it, is different from some of your friends and colleagues?
I don't know. I'm a really different comic. It's like I existed in a bubble. So when I started doing comedy, I was doing open mics in New York City, which means you go and you wait for like 3 hours till 1:30 on the morning to go on stage for 5 minutes in front of 20 comics who don't want to hear you because they're waiting their turn. So that's how like I cut my teeth. And I'm telling you, no joke, the fact that I was disabled, the fact that I was female never occurred to me as something that was going to be an issue. The fact that I was brown, that totally stood out to me. Like I would walk into places and be like, which one of these is not like the other? And I never realized that it was the fact that I was a woman, even though the majority of the time I was the only woman. It just didn't click. I'm like, I don't know, I'm in a bubble.
Well, you've talked glowingly about your upbringing in terms of not being bullied as a kid, you know, a lot of support from your family. Your father, in particular, was instrumental in getting you grounded. Yeah. How
My
was
father's such an interesting issue, and now as someone who works extensively in the disabled community, I understand how lucky I was to have great parents. So my father defies all the stereotypes that are associated with Arabs. You know, people think of Arab fathers as these oppressive, domineering, patriarchal people. He wasn't like that at all. Not only was he invested in my health, as a man who had no money, coming from an immigrant background, who couldn't afford physical therapy. They sent me to dancing school because they couldn't afford physical therapy. They taught me to walk when the doctor said I couldn't. And there's no shame in not walking. But my dad was a realist. And if I was going to be spending half my time in Palestine and half my time in New Jersey, I needed to be mobile. And he empowered me physically, but he also empowered me as a woman because we were never treated differently. His daughters were going to go to college. My sister is an ambassador. They motivated us to do everything that our gender counterparts normally do in the Middle East, and we never thought of it as something different.
And it's only now that you're realizing that that's quite unique and quite special.
It was 5 years ago when I started doing American television, when I finally got my big break and got on TV, a decade into doing comedy. That is when I realized that both being a woman and being disabled is a very, very bad thing in today's society.
You've talked about not being bullied as a kid, not being bullied as an adult, but when you started making those television appearances, receiving some bullying online.
Extensive bullying, cyber stalking, and the type of hate that I can't believe is acceptable in the United States. In the United States. Yeah. And this is key because I do stand-up comedy all over the Middle East, uncovered and uncensored. And in my life, I have never gotten a threat by someone who identified as Arab or Muslim. I've repeatedly gotten threatened by people who identify as right-wing Americans. So I think that's very telling.
Worth noting for sure. You've also said that this new day of social media and that kind of bullying, you're very glad you didn't grow up in that era.
I don't think that I would have continued doing stand-up comedy. I think I would have become a teacher or a lawyer or something like that, because by the time I started getting bullying, I had a decade of experience dealing with drunk hecklers. And if you can deal with a drunk heckler throwing a beer bottle at your head at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can deal with, Jeff who lives at home in mommy's basement and can't even put his own picture as his avatar. That to me, so what I do is when I get attacked online, first I try to educate. Because believe it or not, some of these people are just totally misinformed. So I love this. I do a joke on stage about how people are always like, Maysoon, I love you, but you are evil and you need to accept Jesus. And I'm like, I do accept Jesus. He's a prophet in Islam. Now, can you accept that Jesus looks like me and not Jared Leto? So that's the educate part. And then they're like, oh, okay, she loves Jesus, it's okay. But if they refuse to learn, then I mock them. And people are like, don't feed the trolls. And I'm like, but it's too fun. It's comedy gold. When I'm called an honor killing gone wrong and I can go in and slay that guy, just slay him and know he's never going to have a wittier comeback, it's fun to me. And then right after I mock him, I block him.
Some people have a really hard time with that, with interacting with their trolls.
Yes.
We don't really have a social protocol yet for how to deal with the kind of vitriol that comes on the internet. But you engage.
I engage, but I also engage those being bullied and hope that my experience can teach them. So one of the reasons that I engage is because I don't want people to be able to hurl hate in a vacuum and not understand that it's not okay. If they can't comprehend that it's not okay, it's fine. But I'm going to call it out and let everyone else watching know that this is no way to behave. I don't care if you're anonymous. There's no reason to go online and spew hate, especially towards someone who has no effect on your life. And there's this saying, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. It applies to me, but it doesn't apply to everyone. And the reality is that there are teens and adults harming themselves because they're being hated and stalked online by people. And what I try to do is explain to people that you don't need them. They're nobody. They're screaming for attention and your target, and you have to understand how to block them. Now, that becomes much more difficult when the people who are bullying you are the people who you see every single day in school.
Yeah.
So you're spending all day long being hated. You go home and you don't have a moment of peace. So what I try to do is draw those people to the communities that they can be part of. Because, the internet's like Star Wars. There's a dark side, but there's also light. And the light is people who never had access to the outside world now do. People who were nonverbal can now talk. People who were oppressed can now put videos of the own trauma that they're facing and not depend on others to tell their stories. So I say to them, you don't have to hang out with people who don't like you.
You can find
even
the good
if they're
communities.
your family. Yeah. Come online and find the good communities. Find your ohana, your family that's meant to be online. And I say that I'm busy all the time. I never answer my phone. I got a blessed career. I make time for these kids. At 3 o'clock in the morning, when someone reaches out to me and says, I'm done, I have no friends, I can't do this anymore, I'm like, I'm your friend. And I genuinely am,
Wow.
I swear I'm funny, world. I'm just being really serious right now, but I'm hilarious. Maysoon.com, Maysoon.com.
Let's talk about your comedy career a bit, because you actually started out in theater, in acting.
Yes.
And you moved to comedy.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So I wanted to be on General Hospital. It's a daytime soap opera. I still want to be on General Hospital. It's pretty much the only reason I'm even sitting here at the queue. Everything is a desperate plea for General Hospital to put me on. But when I was auditioning in New York City after graduating in theater, being trained at the neighborhood playhouse, having like the greatest acting teachers in the world, nobody was casting me. And I knew it wasn't because I lacked the talent. So I started looking at TV and realized that nobody looked like me. I'm not a super skinny supermodel of the perfect shade with the perfect hair. And I realized that the people who I did identify with were all comedians. Rosie O'Donnell, Richard Pryor especially, like the original Shaking Brown comic, black comic, of course, but, at the time I was like, I could tan, I got Rachel Dozella. No, but, those were the people who I saw, and I was like, that's the key. I'll do comedy, and then I'll get a sitcom, and then I'll get a talk show, and then I'll be Oprah, and it'll be fine.
Wow. You make it sound so simple, just moving from the theater to comedy.
For me, unfortunately, it was. And what's so funny is that when I was in theater and when I was, auditioning to be an extra on Law & Order, it was like dead body, and they're like, you shake. And I'm like, stop discriminating. Huh? I immediately clicked into comedy. And what's funny about it is I was such a drama queen. Like, I'm going back to teach at my alma mater, Arizona State University. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I tell my students is about my weeping spots, because I had spots where I would just sit and weep on campus. I was such a drama queen. And then by my third comedy show, I was like, oh my God, laughing is so much more fun. And what I love about comedy is I was able to create my own career. So when I complain about no one casting people with disabilities on television, us being the biggest minority and the most underrepresented, people are like, why don't you just make a YouTube show? And I'm like, because I don't have coordination. I can't even get the camera steady. But with comedy, I was able to create my own career.
And do some things on your own terms.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, Dean and I created the New York Arab American Comedy Festival in 2003 to battle the negative images of Arabs as Americans in media. And we were able to do that. Now, if we went on TV and said, please let us talk about the fact that we are American and that this is all bigotry, no one would put us on. But when we created the show and we sold out those shows and we took it on tour, then people like, Live Nation and MSNBC were coming at us. And the biggest thing about comedy for me, though, is that I get to talk about things people refuse to talk about in the mainstream.
When people talk about diversity in Hollywood, and you sort of alluded to this, they're usually talking about gender, they're usually talking about race.
Right.
But as you said, the visibly disabled are the largest minority group. What is the lay of the land for actors who are visibly disabled?
So the disabled are the largest minority group. Now, when it comes to visibly disabled, the reason that I focus on that is because there's a lack of visible disability on TV. But keep in mind, we have no way of knowing how many people with invisible disabilities are on TV because the stigma is so strong that they're afraid to disclose to this day. So those who are invisibly disabled don't even feel comfortable being public about it. Therefore, it's forgotten and not noticed. With visible disability, it's stunning that we're not on the landscape. You're looking at talk shows that have been on for 13, 14 years, and you talk about diversity. They have gender diversity, orientation, color, weight, age, politics, but you don't see anyone with a visible disability. And when you do, I promise you, they are white and they are beautiful. And when you do see disability on TV, it's always one of two stories. You can't love me because I'm disabled, or heal me. And those two things are not our reality. Most disabled people don't spend day and night looking for a cure. That's not what we're doing. That's what our able-bodied saviors are doing. We're living our lives. We're in relationships. Why don't you ever see a visibly disabled person as a romantic lead? Why when Chandra, my idol, the most diverse woman on TV, decided to put Mary McCormick in a wheelchair on Scandal? Why, when those actors exist? Ryan Murphy did the same thing on Glee. He was all about diversity, all about the others, and he chose to put a white male in a wheelchair when he could have hired any white male wheelchair user out there if he insisted, on those other specifications. So we believe as a community, and this is very, very controversial, that visible disability cannot be acted. And we believe that the people who are winning awards for it are actually cartoonish and clowning. And even though Cripping Up has a totally different history than blackface, the reality is that both of our communities have been exploited by Hollywood and have been cast by Hollywood in roles that are detrimental to our community. And we are trying to battle that by getting actors to refuse to play disabled.
Are these things you're able to address through your comedy or through the platform that comedy gives you?
So it's a little bit of both, because I do jokes about General Hospital. So I do jokes about how bad Claire Danes was in Temple Grandin. I say it didn't look like autism. It looked like Anna Nicole in her last days. So those are ways that I get to highlight what I think is outlandish or offensive through my comedy. But absolutely, the comedy opens the door for me to, spew my rhetoric and have my mission accomplished.
You're a groundbreaker on many fronts. Where do you get the energy to push against the status quo? Where does that energy come from?
The shaking, I guess. I have cerebral palsy, and everyone's cerebral palsy behaves in a different way. In my case, I shake all the time. So I say I shake it like Taylor Swift. But she just wants to, and mine's totally involuntary. So I think it might be the shaking. Like, I'm always warm. I'm always ready. I sleep 3 hours a night. Wow. I watch tons and tons of TV. And I think the two things that, drive me the most is, one, I got bills. Right? Mm-hmm. So even on my worst day, I still have to do comedy. It's not an option to not do it. There's that old thing about the show must go on. I don't get to just be like, no, I don't want to wake up and do a 7:30 a.m. breakfast for the Canadian Women's Foundation. They flew me out. I'm getting up. I'm doing my show. And that applies to every show I've ever, done.
But what you don't have to do is speak out, is share a broader message. Does that ever feel like a burden? Or is that something that you love to do?
Yeah. It feels like a burden when the only reason people put me on TV is to talk about how inspirational I am. That, you have this disability, why don't you just tie rocks to yourself and throw yourself in a lake? That to me is frustrating. But I think that I've become a master of spinning stories to talk about what I want to talk about, which is equality for Palestinians in General Hospital. And that to me, it's frustrating to me when people won't allow me to go on TV to talk about anything other than being disabled. And the best part of my career, when I was on Countdown with Keith Olbermann, it was my big break. I was a full-time contributor, and we never talked about disability. We talked about politics, we talked about the environment, we talked about everything else. And it's not because I want to pass as able or I'm not proud. It's because exactly what that line says. I got 99 problems and palsy is just one. And if you only want to talk to me about how inspirational I am, I don't want to talk to you.
Is this the path you always imagined for yourself,
No.
performing?
Go ahead.
What did you imagine for yourself?
No. It's not what I imagined. So I mentioned that I'm a lifelong tap dancer, and I got to tap dance on Broadway. Originally, I was going to be a dancer. And then I got to college, and I was like, that might not be realistic. And by the way, there are some amazing disabled dancers. But for me, I was like, no, that's too much of a pipe dream. I'm going to become an actor. That'll be so much easier. And the way I expected it to go was really, I figured I'd get on General Hospital for about 20 years, and then I'd get cast in a movie, win an Oscar. That was a definite because disabilities win awards. We know this. And a disabled person playing a disability, I mean, shoo-in, come on, right? But I expected by this time I would definitely be a host on one of those panel shows. I thought I'd be on Good Morning America or The View or The Social or something. Mm-hmm. I didn't think that I would still be touring 280 days a year.
280 days.
Yeah, and there are some days where you walk into one of those colleges and you're like, I don't even know what fleek means. Let me figure this out. I need to be hip. Yeah, so it's especially after the TED Talk. When I did the TED Talk, I think what's so interesting about the internet is that it proves that things that other people don't think are popular can be. And so when the TED Talk happened, I thought, 7 million views on TED, 4 million views on YouTube, millions of views in other languages. This is going to prove that I have an audience, that I'm worth putting on TV, that people will listen and tune in. And it didn't. And when that transition didn't happen, that was so shocking to me because I was like, well, you all were constantly telling me to create my own content. Here it is, proof's in the pudding. I'm still not on TV. So what's going on?
Well, I hope the next thing you're on is General Hospital.
I do too. Wouldn't that be amazing? I want to play Sam's evil twin. I'm okay with the evil Arab image if it's on General Hospital. I'm pretty much willing to sell out everything and become like the Ann Coulter of TV if General Hospital puts me on.
Well, I hope the producers are listening right now. Thank you so much.
The only thing I
Maysoon.
won't do is a sex tape. I'm leaving the Kardashians to the Kardashians, even though I look like the lost Kardashian. Google it. I do.
Thank you so much, Maysoon.
Thank you.